Identified you as an advantage player. What do
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of my life as an advantaged blackjack player. Today I'll be taking you back to Las Vegas and showing you what it's like to take on the casinos through my eyes as a card counter. In my last video we hit up Durango, Red Rock, Suncoast, and Rampart. I was able to take home $3,100 over those 4 sessions, which was a nice win, and I was hoping to keep that momentum going. For anyone new here, I'm playing Blackjack and I'm using the high-low counting method to determine when I have an advantage. As my advantage increases, I will bet exponentially higher. My bet spread is on screen, and as you can see, I play from table minimum up to either one hand of $2,000 if I'm solo or 2 hands of $1,200 if I'm playing with other people at the table. I also play using perfect basic strategy as well as some count-based deviations. These charts dictate everything I do. I'm pretty much just a robot that plays perfect blackjack. If you guys want to learn exactly what I'm doing, check out my how to count cards video. Link is in the description and it has everything you need to know to get up to speed on what I'm doing. The first spot I'm hitting is a casino called Santa Fe. They have a pretty decent double deck game here, so naturally I wanted to try it out. I had just played at one of their sister properties a few hours earlier, so I wasn't expecting to get much time here. Regardless, I had to go check it out because who knows, maybe the staff just isn't paying attention that day or they're just preoccupied with other stuff. If that was the case, there is a chance I could get a good session in. As per usual, once I got into the casino, I made a beeline for the double deck table with hopes of a record-breaking session. I bought in and started playing minimum bets until the count went up. For anyone new here, I skipped through the negatives and only showed the positive counts because that's where the exciting action is. I played a few hands into this first shoe until the count hit a true 1. I raised my bet from table minimum to one hand of $100 and was dealt a 13 versus dealer's 10. I promptly turned it into a 24 and lost this first hand. After this one hand at true 1, the count went negative for the rest of the shoe, so I was back to minimum bets. After the shuffle, I played some more negatives at the beginning of the next shoe until the count hit a true 1 for the second time. I was dealt a 16 versus ace. I had no option to surrender, so I had to hit and got dealt a 10 for 26. So far, so bad. The count dropped down into the negatives for a few hands after this until right at the end of the shoe where it raised to a true 3. I had to buy in to fund my next hand of $400. I put it out there and crossed my fingers for some better cards. I was dealt a soft 18 versus dealer's 10, which I hit on and turned into a hard 18. The dealer ended up drawing to 22, so finally we got paid. That was the last positive count in this shoe, so let's fast forward to the next one. This here is a great example of how the high-low system works. I have a fresh shoe here, meaning the dealer just shuffled and we were starting a new game. As I've explained before, in the high-low system, cards that are valued 2 through 6 are low cards, and every time I see one, I add one to the running count. 7, 8, and 9 are neutral, I'll just ignore them. And 10s and aces are high cards. Whenever I see one of these, I subtract one from the running count. As the dealer starts dealing cards, I'll start updating that running count. Because it's a new shoe, I'll start at 0. Here I was dealt a high card and a low card together, which will cancel each other out. Dealer had an 8, so running count is still 0. I'm dealt a 6, so I add 1 to the running count, and the dealer flips a 6 and a 9, so I add another 1 to the running count for the 6 that was dealt. We now have a running count of 2, with 2 decks remaining to be dealt, so if I divide my running count of 2 by those 2 decks, I'm left with a true count of 1. This means I'm upping my bet to $100. I'll update the running count for the next couple of hands and see if you can follow along. I'm dealt a 7 versus dealer's 10, I hit and get a 10 for 17, which I stay on. Dealer flips an 8 for 18, so I lose this one. Count is still a true 1, so I put out another bet of $100. I'm dealt a 13 versus dealer 6, I stay and the dealer draws a 10 and then a 9 for a bust. Running count is still 2, we're still dividing by the 2 decks remaining to be dealt, so true count is still at 1. One more bet of $100 and finally we get a nice little blackjack, which is great, but also means the count has now dipped into the negative. This means I'm back down to minimum bets until it goes up again. I hope this example has helped some of you who are new to this to see the system in action. I'm just constantly repeating that running count in my head. updating it for every card that comes out, and every once in a while we get very high true counts, which means high advantage for me, and that's why I raise my bets higher. The casino staff knows all of this, and they could do the exact same thing I'm doing, count the showdown with me, and if they see that I'm raising my bets as the count goes up, they know I'm playing with an advantage, and they'll come and ask me to stop. Anyways, the count went absolutely abysmal for the rest of this shoe, so after a shuffle we got into hopefully a better one. Things began looking up right away, the count hit a true 1 very quickly, so I put out $100. I was dealt a 13 versus 4, I stood and the dealer drew to 21, so that was a loss. All those small cards brought the count up to a true 2, and I raised my bet to $200. I was dealt a 20 versus dealer's 3, of course I stood and the dealer drew to a bust, so we won this hand. The count dropped back down to a true 1, and I was dealt a 5 versus dealer's 10. I hit it all the way into a 22, so that was a bust, but hey, at least we were back up to a true 2. I was dealt a 16 versus dealer 7, I hit and got an ace amazingly. I was hoping for a push, but the dealer also drew an ace, so this hand lost. Back down to a $100 bet, I was dealt 13 versus dealer's 10. I didn't get a chance to play this one because the dealer had Blackjack. After this, the count dropped down to 0 for one hand, but quickly recovered to a true 3. I put out a hand of $400 and was dealt a 14 versus dealer 6. I stood, hoping for the dealer bust, and luckily she did just that, so we were paid out on this one. Count dropped back down, so I lowered my bet to $200. I was dealt a 7 versus dealer's 5. I turned my 7 into a 17. Dealer also drew to 17, so this hand was a push. That was a lot of low cards that just came out, and the count had now jumped to a true 5. This means one hand of 1200, and if there was ever a time to get some good cards, let it be now. Sadly, I was dealt a pair of 2s versus dealer's ace, so this means I was pulling out cash to buy insurance. Thankfully, it wasn't in vain because the dealer did have Blackjack, meaning we lost no money on this hand. We had one more shot at glory as the count was now officially a true 6, meaning one hand of $1,500. I put it out there and was dealt a 15 versus dealer's 8, and I had no choice but to hit.
Bruh.
Sadly, luck was not on my side here. This hand busted, but the count was still massive, so there was hope for redemption. I pulled out some cash and tried to buy in to fund another hand of $1,500.
Yeah. Thanks. No worries.
Okay, good luck too.
Yeah, have a good night.
So unfortunately, just like the end of my last video, I was backed off in a massive count, which really sucks. Nothing I can do but move on to the next spot. All in all, I got 17 minutes here at Santa Fe, and my hourly EV was 1,850. I haven't touched on it in this video yet, but EV stands for expected value. It's an hourly rate that's calculated based on game conditions, speed, and bet sizes. Lastly, I had a session loss of $945, not the result we were hoping for, but it's all part of the game. I wasted no time moving on to my next spot, which was a casino called Aliante. They have a very similar double deck game here to what I was just playing, and you guys saw how much that last one was worth. There was potential here to make a lot of money. When I got inside, I found the table I wanted, which had a couple other players at it. I looked around and saw two tables with identical games, except for the table max was lower at $500. Even though my max bet would be limited on these tables, they were actually worth more EV than playing with two other people at the higher limit tables, because other people slow the game down like crazy. I took a seat at the lower limit table and started to buy in.
I got some go over there. Thanks anyways. Oh, I got my foot, yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to play alone.
As you guys just saw, as soon as I sat down here, another person joined the table. This is always slightly annoying for us as advantaged players. It wasn't a private table, I can't ask him to leave, but since there was another table right beside this one that was empty, I jumped over and played there instead. Playing with just one other person cuts my expected value nearly in half, so I always try to play with as little people as possible, especially in Vegas where sessions are so short. Luckily, on this second table, I got it all to myself, so let's see if we can make some money. On a side note, thank you everyone for watching today, and if you're new, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. There's always more to come, and if you're interested in supporting me further, check out my YouTube memberships. The count rose very quickly on this shoe. I only played 3 hands at minimum bet before the count hit a true 2. I was changing up my bet spread on this table ever so slightly due to the lower table max, so I raised my bet to 2 hands of 200. My first hand was dealt a 19 and my second hand was an 8. Dealer was showing 4, so I stood my first hand and hit my second hand, getting an ace for another 19. It was all up to the dealer now, and he made us proud by drawing to 22, so both my hands were paid. The count was now a true 3, and I raised my bet to 2 hands of 300. I was dealt 2 12s versus dealer's 3, which I stood on. This is a deviation that occurs at a true 2, otherwise I would have hit. Luckily, the dealer ended up busting, and both these hands were paid. Hoping to keep this momentum going, I raised my bet to 2 hands of 500, seeing as it was a true count of 4 or higher. I was dealt a 17 and a 16 versus dealer's 8, which ain't pretty. I stood the 17 and turned the 16 into a 26. Dealer flipped a 10 for 18, so both hands ended up losing here. The count was still there for the 2 hands of 500, so I bought in for more and tried again. I was dealt a soft 20 and a 12 versus dealer's 3. I stood on both hands, again deviating from basic strategy for the 12. Dealer ended up drawing to 22, so we were able to make a bit of a comeback here. Count was still a true 4 or higher, and finally we got to an interesting hand. I was dealt a soft 14 and a 20 versus dealer 6. This was a chance to make some real money, so I doubled my soft 14 and split my 10s. My first 10 split got a 9 for 19, so I stood that, and the second split got another 10. Count was still there, so I bought in and resplit the 10s a second time. You could be certain that all eyes were on me at this point, but I couldn't miss out on this opportunity. I got another 10 for my second split hand, but the count had now dipped below a true 4, so I didn't split this one. My final split hand received a 5 for 15, so I had a 14, a 19, a 20, and a 15 versus dealer 6. All the dealer had to do was bust. Like, please bust. Aww. Unfortunately, it just wasn't in the cards today. The dealer drew to 20 somehow, so I lost most of the money I had wagered. You hate to see it, and trust me when I say it gets worse than that. Much worse at times. Anyways, the count was back up to a true 4, so I put out another 2 hands of 500. I was dealt a soft 18 and a 12 versus dealer's ace. The count had dropped below a true 2.5 at this point in time, so I didn't take insurance. Of course, the dealer did have blackjack this time, so I lost both these hands. We were now down to a true 1, so I lowered my bet to $100. I was dealt a soft 18 versus dealer 7, which I stood on, and just to add insult to injury, the dealer drew to 21. The count went negative for the last hand of the shoe, so I dropped down to minimum bet. I really want to tell you guys it turned around for me, but sadly after this I played almost 2 full shoes in negative counts until the surveillance team paid me a visit.
I identified you as an advantage player, so what do you
Yeah.
No more blackjack for me. They got to me before I had a chance to make it back, or make it worse. Either way, I was done here. I lasted a whopping 13 minutes, my average hourly EV was $935, and I managed to leave $1,965 poorer. Continuing on, I made my way to my next spot, which was a casino called Canary. They have an identical game to what I was just playing, except it's pitched, meaning the dealer deals the cards face down. This is a sister property to Aliante, so I was likely not going to last very long. I got in there and scoped out the conditions and ran into a similar situation to Aliante. The $1,000 max table was very busy, but the $500 max wasn't. Of course I opted for the $500 max table in order to maximize my EV. I sat down, started playing, and the count quickly began to rise. We hit a true 1, so I threw out $100 and was dealt a 20 versus dealer's 10. Of course I stood and the dealer drew to 22, so this one was a win. The count dipped back into the negative for one hand before returning back to a true 1. I was dealt an 8 versus a dealer's 2, which I turned into a 19. Dealer drew to 18, so this one was also a win. All of those small cards brought the count up to a true 4, so I raised my bet to 2 hands of 500. I was dealt 2 17s versus a dealer's 8, which I stood on. The dealer drew to 18 in the most annoying way possible, so I lost both of these hands. The count was now up to a true 5 or higher, so I tried to raise my bet to 3 hands of 500. They didn't allow playing 3 hands at the previous casino I was at, but I was hoping they allowed it here, even though it's a sister property.
No. It's only $4.50 in here for 3 hands.
That says 500, doesn't it?
Table limit is 500, so 3 hands is 300.
Oh.
And then 2 hands is 400.
Well, she just let me play 2 hands of 500 and I lost them both, so.
Okay, so we're gonna give you 200 back. You gotta look at the table, baby, okay?
Yeah, like I'm not mad or anything. Like, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just explain quickly what happened there. I was allowed to play 3 hands, but at this casino, as you increase your hands, your betting limit goes down. So even though the table max was $500, at 2 hands the max was $400, and at 3 hands the max was $300. This was slightly annoying, but the game was still very playable. I may or may not have seen the sign displaying this rule and attempted to play 3 hands of 500 anyways. I guess we'll just never know. Anyways, it looks like 2 by 400 was going to be my table max for today, so I put him out there and was dealt a handful of nothing, which didn't even matter because the dealer had a blackjack, so both of my shitty hands lost. I put out another 2 hands of 400 and was dealt a 20 and a 19 versus dealer's 10. I stood on both and the dealer flipped a 10 for 20, so I lost one hand and pushed the other. The count dropped down to a true 2, so I lowered my bet to 1 hand of $200. I was dealt a 13 versus 10, which I amazingly turned into a 20 and stood. Dealer drew to 17, so we actually won a hand. After this, the count was down to a true 1, so I lowered my bet to 1 hand of 100. I was dealt a 20 versus dealer's 8. Of course, I stood, and the dealer drew to 18, so this one also won. It always feels nice to have a bunch of my big bets lose, and then as soon as I lower my bet, I start winning. Just feels great. So lucky. We were now back to minimum bets for the rest of the shoe, so let's fast forward to the next one where it hit a true 1. I threw out a bet of $100 and was dealt a 12 versus dealer's 5. I stood and the dealer drew to 25, so this one was also a win. I left my bet out and was dealt an 18 versus dealer's 10. I stood and the dealer drew to 20, so we lost this one. The count was back into the negative, so I dropped my bet and waited for it to go up again. After a few hands, the count went up to a true 2, so I tried raising my bet to 2 hands of $200.
Okay, sir. Can I talk to you for a minute, please?
Sure. I'll call her back. I'll just go.
Okay. You can't play typical games here anymore, okay? You can play slot machine or whatever.
Okay, I'll get right on that. Yeah.
Okay, no table games.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Change 100.
Looks like no more table games for me, so that means I was out of here. All in all, I got 10 minutes in, my hourly EV was $565, and I left with a loss of $1,525. That means we were on our 3rd losing session in a row. This is totally normal, but still, it never feels great. The only way to make any of it back is to go and start another session, so I did just that. The next spot I set my sights on was a casino called Sunset Station. They have a great double deck game here. It can be worth a ton if the conditions are right, and it may be just what I need to win some of this money back. Armed with several $1,000s and a dream, I got in there and made my way to the double deck table. I knew my time here would be quick because this casino is a sister property to Santa Fe, which was the first spot I played in this video. I wasted no time buying in and starting a shoe. The first one I played was entirely negative counts, so I didn't raise my bet once. However, shortly into the next one, the count hit a true 2. Since I wasn't playing solo, I was on my 2-hand spread and I raised my bet to 2 hands of 200. I was dealt a 19 and a 20 versus dealer's 8, and I stood on both of them. Dealer flipped a 10 for 18, so both my bets were paid. That was the only positive count for this second shoe, so I played minimum bets until the shuffle. On my 3rd shoe, I finally got into some consistent positive counts. Almost immediately, I raised my bet to $100 and was dealt a 10 versus dealer's 2. I doubled and received an ace for 21, dealer drew to 17, so this double was paid out. Count was now up to a true 3, and I raised my bet to 2 hands of 300. I was dealt a 20 and a blackjack versus dealer's 5. This is what's supposed to happen in the high counts. My blackjack was paid and I stood my 20, dealer drew to 23, so my first hand also won. All those big cards brought the count down to a true 1, and I lowered my bet to $100. I was dealt a 14 versus dealer's 8, I hit and turned it into a 19. Dealer flipped a 10 for 18, so I won this hand. I left my bet out and was dealt a 12 versus dealer's 8, I turned this into a 22, so that was no good. After this hand played out, the count rose back up to a true 3, so I raised my bet to 2 hands of 300. I was dealt a 17 and a 19 versus dealer's 9, I stood on both expecting a push and a loss. But to my surprise, the dealer actually busted their hand. This means both my hands were paid and I was grinning. That was the last positive count of this shoe, so let's fast forward to the next one. Once again, the count started to raise quickly and we hit a true 1. I threw out my $100 bet and was dealt an 8 versus dealer's 5. Through some master strategic hitting, I managed to turn it into a 21. Dealer busted, so this one was a win. The count had raised to a true 2, so I upped my bet to 2 hands of 200. I was dealt a 10 and a 14 versus dealer's 9. I doubled my 10 and turned it into a 20, so that was nice. Unfortunately, I wasn't so lucky on my 14. Dealer flipped a 9 for 18, so at least my double was paid. The count dipped down to a true 1 and I lowered my bet to $100. I was dealt a 15 versus dealer's 7, I hit and got a 6 for 21. The dealer also drew to 21, so this was a push, but overall I had been very lucky on this session so far. I was hoping that kept up because the count was now a true 7, which means I was raising my bet to 2 hands of $1,200. I'll let this one play out in real time for you guys.
I don't got one.
You want some pink, dude?
Yeah, sure.
It doesn't get much better than that. Somehow I pulled a 7 on my 14 with max bets out. As I'm watching this, I can barely believe my eyes. The heat was definitely on at this point. I didn't catch it in frame, but there was phone calls being made and it was very obvious that my back off was imminent. The count was bordering on a true 4 and I wasn't letting them back me off in a super high count again. I rushed to get another 2 hands of 400 out because this was still a very advantageous situation for me. I was dealt a soft 15 and a 9 versus a dealer's 10, so I had some work to do. I actually f***ed up this first hand because I stood my 14 against dealer's 10. I must have thought that I had a 15 here. It's the only reason I would have done that, and I was just playing quickly, so yeah, I made a mistake. We all make them once in a while, and it's just part of the game. You try to minimize them though. I turned my 9 into a 19, but it was no use as the dealer had a 10 underneath. That means that both my hands lost, and since that was the last hand of the shoe, I decided to color up and leave. I knew my time was up, so I headed to the cashier. I didn't catch it on film, but some surveillance staff came up to me after I cashed out and called me by name. They were friendly and pretty much just said, "Nice win, we'll get you back next time." It was funny and I really wish I'd cut it on film, and it kind of shows that these guys are lighthearted about it. They're not taking it super seriously. Obviously they'd still come back me off though, so they're not that chill. All in all, I got 23 minutes here, my hourly EV was $861, and I finished with a nice little win of $3,700. This was an awesome session for me. I had some great variance and it felt good to win back most of what I lost earlier. At the end of the day, it's all about long-term numbers, and any one single session doesn't mean much, but still, it never feels bad to win. The final net loss for this video was $735 over 1 hour and 3 minutes of play. Not the result I was hoping for, but as you guys saw, it could have been much worse. I'm going to end it here for the day. One thing I want to address quick is some of you asking about my Bellagio video, which I alluded to in my first Vegas video. It's going to be my finale for this Vegas trip series. I want to wait as long as possible until I post it for a number of reasons that I can't really get into. Just know that it is coming eventually and it's going to be a good one. With that said, thank you all for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.